The city held its breath. A famous businessman, Mr. Abernathy, was gone. Not just gone, but murdered in his own study, a room locked from the inside. Detective Miller sighed, the weight of the case pressing down on him like the city smog. He'd seen enough death to last several lifetimes, but this one felt different, heavier somehow. He adjusted his tie, the cheap fabric scratching against his skin. Abernathy, he muttered, looking at the crime scene photos. The man had been powerful, influential. Now, he was just a photo, a grim reminder of the darkness that lurked beneath the city's glittering surface. The call had come in early that morning. Abernathy's housekeeper had found him. The study was a mess, papers scattered, a shattered glass on the floor. The only way in or out was the door, which had been locked from the inside with a complicated old-fashioned key, now lying beside the body. Miller ran a hand through his thinning hair. The initial report pointed to a struggle. But Abernathy was a big man, strong. Who could have overpowered him? And how did they lock the door behind them? The prime suspect, almost immediately, was Arthur Reeves, Abernathy's business partner. They had been close, inseparable, until recently. Rumors swirled of disagreements, of a deal gone sour, of money owed. Reeves, according to his statement, was out of town on business in a neighboring state. He had witnesses, receipts, the whole 9 yards. A solid alibi. Too solid, perhaps. Miller had learned over the years that the best lies were often the ones closest to the truth. Something about Reeves' story didn't quite sit right. He seemed too eager to cooperate, too willing to offer explanations. Like a magician showing off his empty hands, trying to distract you from the real trick. Run Reeves again, Miller told his partner, Detective Jones, a young, eager officer still full of idealism. Check everything. His flight, his hotel, his meetings. I want to know every minute of his time. Jones nodded, already typing away at his computer. Miller turned back to the photos, his gaze drawn to the expensive coat hanging in Abernathy's closet. It was a custom-made piece, Abernathy's style. But something about the pockets, they seemed a little too bulky, a little too full. Miller had a hunch. He didn't know why, but he had a hunch. That hunch would soon turn into a lead, a small piece of paper that would unravel the entire case. A torn movie ticket, a tiny slip of evidence that would challenge everything they thought they knew. The weight of the Abernathy case settled heavily on Detective Miller's shoulders. He was a man etched with the city's stories, the good, the bad, and the brutally ugly. Years on the force had worn him down, leaving him with a weariness that seeped into his bones. He'd seen too much, known too much. The innocence had long since been scrubbed away, leaving behind a cynical shell. But beneath that hardened exterior, a flicker of justice still burned. It was that flicker that kept him going, that drove him to unravel the tangled webs of lies and deceit that he encountered every day. Abernathy's death was a puzzle, a locked-room mystery with too many pieces missing. The victim, a man of power and influence, silenced in his own sanctuary. The suspect, Reeves, with his airtight alibi and his too smooth demeanor. And then there was the coat, the expensive coat hanging in the closet, its pockets bulging with secrets. Miller couldn't shake the feeling that the answer lay hidden within those pockets. He pictured the coat, the fine wool fabric, the subtle stitching. It was a garment of wealth, of status. Abernathy had been a man who appreciated the finer things in life. He imagined Abernathy wearing the coat, perhaps on the night of his death. Had he been meeting someone? Had he been expecting trouble? The questions swirled in Miller's mind, unanswered, frustrating. Jones, Miller said, his voice raspy from years of cigarettes and late nights. I want that coat. I want it in the lab. Every fiber, every thread. I want to know everything about it. Jones, ever eager, nodded and hurried off to retrieve the evidence. Miller watched him go, a flicker of hope igniting within him. The coat was a long shot, a hunch based on nothing more than instinct. But Miller had learned to trust his instincts. They had led him to the truth before, and he hoped they would lead him there again. He glanced at the crime scene photos again, his gaze lingering on the shattered glass on the floor. A struggle. A desperate fight for life. And then, silence. Who had been in that room with Abernathy? And how had they locked the door behind them? The answers were out there, hidden in the shadows, waiting to be discovered. And Detective Miller, the weary, cynical detective with a flicker of justice still burning within him, was determined to find them. The city held its breath, waiting for the truth to be revealed. And Miller knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his gut, that the truth would come, one way or another. The lab techs would work their magic on the coat, searching for fibers, hairs, anything that didn't belong. But Miller knew the real answers lay not in the threads, but in the life of the man who wore it. Abernathy. John Abernathy was a titan of industry, a self-made man who had clawed his way to the top. He was known for his sharp business acumen, his ruthless ambition, and his impeccable taste. He lived in a mansion overlooking the city, a monument to his success. He collected art, drove expensive cars, and wore custom-tailored suits. He was, in every sense of the word, a man of wealth and power. But beneath the polished surface, there were whispers. Whispers of shady deals, of broken promises, of enemies made along the way. Abernathy was not a saint. He was a man who had played the game, and he had played it hard. The medical examiner had placed the time of death between 9 p.m. and 11 p.m. Abernathy had been alone in his study, working late as usual, when his killer had struck. The locked door suggested a planned attack, a calculated move. Someone who knew Abernathy's routine, someone who had access to his home, or someone very clever. The study itself was a reflection of Abernathy's personality, opulent, yet organized. Books lined the walls, leather-bound and untouched. A large mahogany desk dominated the room, cluttered with papers and files. A crystal decanter sat on a side table, along with 2 glasses. One was empty, the other shattered on the floor. Abernathy had been drinking with someone. But who? Miller pictured the scene, Abernathy, pouring a drink for his guest, engaging in polite conversation. The atmosphere cordial, unsuspecting. And then, the sudden shift. A harsh word, a raised voice, a violent act. The struggle, the shattered glass, the final, fatal blow. The locked door was the key. How had the killer managed to lock it from the inside? Had they used a trick? Had they had an accomplice? Or was there another way out of the room that they had overlooked? Miller knew that every detail mattered. Every clue, no matter how small, could hold the key to solving the mystery. He just had to find it. He had to piece together the events of that night, to understand the motivations of the killer, to bring justice to John Abernathy. And he would start with the coat, the expensive coat that held the secrets of a dead man. Arthur Reeves. The name echoed in Miller's mind, a constant reminder of the puzzle he was trying to solve. Reeves was Abernathy's right-hand man, his confidant, his partner in crime, some whispered. He was the obvious suspect, and yet, his alibi was almost too perfect. Reeves was a man of medium height, with a neatly trimmed beard and a nervous habit of adjusting his tie. He was impeccably dressed, but there was a certain unease about him, a subtle tremor in his hands that betrayed his composure. He presented himself as a grieving friend, shocked and saddened by Abernathy's death. But Miller saw something else in his eyes, a flicker of fear, perhaps, or guilt. According to Reeves, he had been in another state on a business trip, attending a conference on renewable energy. He had plane tickets, hotel reservations, and witness statements to back up his claim. He had even presented Miller with a detailed itinerary, outlining his every move. "I was shocked when I heard about John," Reeves had said, his voice trembling slightly. "We were like brothers. I can't imagine who would want to hurt him." But Miller wasn't buying it. He had seen too many lies, too many carefully constructed facades. He knew that people were capable of anything, especially when money was involved. And Abernathy had a lot of money. Miller had instructed Jones to verify every aspect of Reeves' alibi. He wanted to know who Reeves had met with, what he had discussed, and whether there were any gaps in his story. He wanted to find the crack in Reeves' armor, the chink in his seemingly impenetrable defense. The initial reports had come back clean. Reeves had indeed attended the conference. He had met with the people he claimed to have met with. His alibi seemed solid. But Miller refused to give up. He knew that the devil was in the details, and he was determined to find those details, no matter how small. He had a feeling that Reeves was hiding something, and he wouldn't rest until he uncovered the truth. He thought back to the coat, hanging in Abernathy's closet. Why had Abernathy been wearing it on the night of his death? Had he been expecting a visitor? Had he been planning to go out? And what was in those pockets? The answer, Miller suspected, lay hidden within those pockets, waiting to be discovered. And that torn movie ticket, that seemingly insignificant piece of paper, was about to change everything. It was about to shatter Reeves' alibi and expose the truth about what really happened on the night of Abernathy's murder. The initial investigation into Reeves' alibi was a frustrating exercise in bureaucratic box-ticking. Jones, ever diligent, had contacted the hotel where Reeves claimed to have stayed. The hotel confirmed that a Mr. Arthur Reeves had checked in and out on the dates in question. He had spoken to several attendees at the Renewable Energy Conference. They all remembered seeing Reeves there, participating in the sessions, asking questions. They described him as engaged and professional. Even the airline confirmed that Reeves had flown to and from the neighboring state on the dates he had provided. The receipts, the confirmations, the witness statements, everything lined up perfectly. And yet, Miller couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It was a gut feeling, an intuition honed over years of solving crimes. He had learned to trust his instincts, even when they defied logic. He reviewed the crime scene photos again, focusing on the details that others might have overlooked. The position of the body, the angle of the shattered glass, the arrangement of the papers on the desk. He was looking for a clue, a sign, something that would contradict Reeves' story. He thought about the locked door. It was the key to the whole mystery. If they could figure out how the killer had locked the door from the inside, they would be one step closer to solving the case. He had asked the forensics team to examine the lock, to look for any signs of tampering. They had found nothing. The lock was old-fashioned, but it was in perfect working order. Miller rubbed his temples, trying to clear his mind. He felt like he was missing something obvious, something that was right in front of his face. He knew that Reeves was a smart man, a careful man. If he had committed the murder, he would have covered his tracks meticulously. He wouldn't have left any loose ends. But everyone makes mistakes. Even the smartest criminals slip up eventually. And Miller was determined to find Reeves' mistake. He trusted Jones, but he also knew that young detectives could be easily fooled. They were eager to please, to impress their superiors. They sometimes overlooked the subtle nuances, the inconsistencies that seasoned detectives like Miller could pick up on. That's why Miller decided to revisit the witnesses himself. He wanted to look them in the eye, to gauge their reactions, to see if they were telling the truth. He wanted to see if he could find the crack in Reeves' alibi that everyone else had missed. He felt it in his bones, Reeves was involved, and the torn movie ticket stub was about to prove it. The call came late that evening, just as Miller was about to head home for a much-needed night's sleep. It was Jones. His voice was tight with excitement. "Miller, you're not going to believe this." The lab report came back on the coat. Miller's weariness vanished instantly. And they found something in the pockets. A torn movie ticket stub. A movie ticket. Miller's mind raced. What could a movie ticket possibly have to do with Abernathy's murder? "What movie?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Some action flick playing at the Metro Cinema downtown. The showing was on the night of the murder, between 9:30 and 11:30 p.m. Miller felt a surge of adrenaline. 9:30 to 11:30. Right within the estimated time of death. And the coat? Miller asked, his heart pounding. Whose coat is it? It's Abernathy's. Custom made. The label confirms it. Abernathy's coat. A movie ticket for a showing during the time of the murder. It was too much of a coincidence. Run the ticket, Miller ordered. See if we can trace it back to the purchaser. Check the security footage at the cinema. I want to know who bought that ticket, and I want to know if they saw Abernathy there. Jones promised to get right on it. Miller hung up the phone, his mind buzzing with possibilities. The movie ticket was the break he had been waiting for. It was the crack in Reeves' alibi, the loose end that he had been searching for. He pictured the scene, Abernathy, sitting in a darkened theater, watching a movie. Had he been alone? Had he been meeting someone? Had he been expecting trouble? And what about Reeves? Had he been at the cinema too? Had he been lying about being out of town? The questions swirled in Miller's mind, unanswered. But he knew that he was getting closer to the truth. The movie ticket was the key, and he was determined to use it to unlock the secrets of Abernathy's murder. He reread the lab report about the movie ticket, clinging to the details. It was slightly crumpled, torn unevenly on one side, and faintly smelled of popcorn. This small detail could unravel the whole story. He grabbed his coat and headed out the door. He had a feeling that he was about to have a very long night. The torn movie ticket had just changed everything. The Metro Cinema. A faded, slightly run-down movie house in the heart of downtown. It wasn't the kind of place Abernathy would typically frequent. He preferred the upscale theaters in the wealthier part of town, the ones with the plush seats and the gourmet snacks. So why had he been at the Metro Cinema on the night of his death? The movie playing was Steel Justice, a loud, mindless action film. Not exactly Abernathy's taste. He was a man of culture, of refinement. He preferred art house films, foreign dramas, the kind of movies that made you think. But the movie ticket stub was undeniable evidence. Abernathy had been there, at the Metro Cinema, on the night of his death, watching Steel Justice. Miller arrived at the cinema, the neon lights casting a garish glow on the grimy street. The place was nearly empty, the last showing of the night just letting out. He flashed his badge at the ticket taker, a bored-looking teenager with a name tag that read, Kevin. I need to speak to the manager, Miller said, his voice firm. Kevin shrugged and pointed to a door in the back. He's in his office. The manager, a middle-aged man with a comb-over and a stained shirt, greeted Miller with a wary look. Detective Miller, Police Department, Miller said, flashing his badge again. I'm investigating a murder, and I need your help. The manager's eyes widened. A murder? Here. Not here, but related to this cinema. I need to see your security footage from the night of the 15th, specifically, the footage from the 9:30 showing of Steel Justice. The manager hesitated. That's a lot of footage, detective. It'll take hours to review. I don't have hours, Miller said, his voice hardening. A man is dead. Now, are you going to help me, or am I going to have to get a warrant? The manager sighed and led Miller to a small, cluttered office in the back. He pulled up the security footage on a grainy monitor. Miller watched intently as the footage played, his eyes scanning the faces of the moviegoers as they entered the theater. He was looking for Abernathy, but he was also looking for Reeves. He was looking for anything that seemed out of place, anything that would give him a clue. The footage showed a sparse crowd, mostly young men. He fast-forwarded, watching for anyone who looked like they were trying to hide. The clock inched forward. Then, he saw him. It was a grainy image, and the angle was poor, but Miller was certain. It was Abernathy. Alone, wearing a hat pulled low over his face. Miller walked into the interrogation room, the grainy photo of Abernathy at the Metro Cinema clutched in his hand. Reeves was already there, looking even more nervous than before. He fidgeted in his seat, his eyes darting around the room. "Mr. Reeves," Miller said, his voice cold and even. "We need to talk." He placed the photo on the table in front of Reeves. Reeves glanced at it, his face paling. "What is this?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "This is a photograph, taken from the security footage at the Metro Cinema on the night of Mr. Abernathy's murder. It appears to be a photo of Mr. Abernathy." Reeves stared at the photo, his mind racing. He knew that his carefully constructed alibi was crumbling around him. "That's not him," he said, his voice rising slightly. "That could be anyone." "We also found this in Mr. Abernathy's coat pocket," Miller said, placing the torn movie ticket stub on the table next to the photo. "A ticket for the 9:30 showing of Steel Justice at the Metro Cinema on the night of the murder." Reeves' eyes widened. He knew that he was trapped. I don't know anything about that," he stammered. "That coat isn't mine. The label says otherwise, Mr. Reeves. It's a custom-made coat, specifically tailored for Mr. Abernathy." Reeves shifted in his seat, his gaze darting around the room, searching for an escape. Okay, he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Maybe it's Abernathy's coat, but I haven't seen it in weeks. Maybe he lent it to someone." "Lent it to someone?" Miller asked, raising an eyebrow. "On the night of his murder? And that someone just happened to go to see Steel Justice at the Metro Cinema?" Reeves looked down at the table, defeated. He knew that his lies were falling apart. I don't know what to say," he mumbled. "I wasn't there. I was out of town. But Mr. Abernathy was there, Mr. Reeves. And so, it seems, were you." Miller leaned forward, his eyes locking with Reeves. "The game is up, Mr. Reeves. It's time to tell the truth." The sweat trickled down Reeves' forehead. He was trapped, caught in his own web of lies. He knew that he couldn't keep up the charade any longer. The movie ticket, that small, insignificant piece of paper, had just destroyed his alibi. Now, he had a decision to make. Confess, or continue to lie and dig himself even deeper. Miller watched, waiting patiently for Reeves to make his choice. The silence in the room was thick and heavy, broken only by Reeves' ragged breathing. Reeves sat in silence, the weight of Miller's gaze pressing down on him. Miller knew he was close. He could feel it. He decided to leave Reeves stewing for a bit while he followed up on the cinema angle. Back at the Metro Cinema, Miller started with Kevin, the ticket taker. Kevin was young, impressionable. Miller showed him a photo of Reeves. "Do you recognize this man?" Miller asked. Kevin squinted at the photo. "I don't know, maybe. I see a lot of faces." "Think hard, Kevin. This is important. He might have been here on the night of the 15th, for the 9:30 showing of Steel Justice." Kevin scratched his head. "I don't know, man. It was a while ago. I just tear the tickets and let people in." Miller sighed. It was a long shot, but he had to try. He showed Kevin the photo of Abernathy. "What about this man? Did you see him that night?" Kevin looked at the photo, his eyes widening slightly. "Yeah, I think so. He was wearing a hat, pulled down low. He didn't say anything. Just bought a ticket and went in." "Did he seem like he was with anyone?" Miller pressed. "Nah, he was alone. Seemed kinda nervous, like he didn't want to be seen." That confirmed it. Abernathy had been at the cinema, and he had been trying to stay hidden. But why? Miller then spoke to the concession stand worker, a woman named Maria. Maria was older, more observant. He showed her the photo of Reeves. "This man," Miller asked. "Did you see him here on the night of the 15th? Maria studied the photo carefully. I think so. He bought a large popcorn and a soda. He was with someone, but I didn't get a good look at the other person. They went into the theater together. Can you describe the other person? Miller asked, his heart pounding. Maria shrugged. Not really. It was dark. They were wearing a hat and a coat. I didn't see their face. It was vague, but it was something. Reeves had been at the cinema, and he had been with someone. Someone who was trying to stay hidden. Miller reviewed the security footage again, this time focusing on the concession stand area. He scanned the faces of the people buying snacks, looking for Reeves. There he was. Standing in line, buying popcorn and soda. And next to him, a figure shrouded in shadows, wearing a hat and a coat. It was impossible to make out their face. But Miller knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his gut, that it was Abernathy. The pieces were starting to fall into place. Now he just needed to find the motive. Miller returned to the interrogation room. Reeves hadn't moved. He was still sitting in the same position, staring blankly at the table. I went back to the cinema, Miller said, his voice low and deliberate. I spoke to the staff. They remember you, Mr. Reeves. They remember you buying tickets for Steel Justice on the night of the murder. Reeves' eyes flickered, but he didn't say anything. They also remember seeing Mr. Abernathy, Miller continued. He was wearing a hat, trying to stay hidden. He seemed nervous, like he didn't want to be seen. Reeves swallowed hard. They said you were with him, Miller added. You bought the tickets, you bought the snacks. You were there, Mr. Reeves. You can't deny it any longer. Reeves finally broke. He looked up at Miller, his eyes filled with desperation. Okay, fine, he said, his voice cracking. I was there. But I didn't kill him. Then tell me what happened, Mr. Reeves, Miller said, leaning forward. Tell me the truth. Reeves took a deep breath and began to speak. He explained that Abernathy had called him that day, asking him to meet him at the Metro Cinema. Abernathy had been acting strangely, paranoid. He said he was in danger, that someone was trying to kill him. He said he needed my help, Reeves explained. He said he trusted me more than anyone else. Reeves claimed that he had tried to talk Abernathy out of going to the cinema, but Abernathy had insisted. He said it was the only place they could meet safely. He thought he was being followed, Reeves said. He thought someone was watching him. At the cinema, Abernathy had insisted on sitting in the back row, in the darkest corner of the theater. He had kept looking over his shoulder, his eyes darting around nervously. He was scared, Reeves said. I've never seen him like that before. During the movie, Abernathy had received a phone call. He had stepped outside to take it, telling Reeves to wait for him. He was gone for a long time, Reeves said. I started to get worried. I went outside to look for him, but he was nowhere to be found. Reeves claimed that he had searched the cinema and the surrounding streets, but he couldn't find Abernathy. He had panicked, afraid that something terrible had happened. I didn't know what to do, Reeves said. I was scared. I didn't want to get involved. So I went back to my hotel and pretended that nothing had happened. Miller listened intently, his mind racing. Was Reeves telling the truth? Or was this just another lie, another attempt to deceive him? The cinema employee, Kevin, though, provided a detail Miller hadn't expected. Kevin remembered the man who bought the ticket for Abernathy as having a neatly trimmed beard, just like Reeves. This detail would either make or break the case. Miller listened to Reeves' story with a skeptical ear. It sounded plausible, but he had learned never to trust anything at face value. He needed proof. You said Abernathy received a phone call, Miller said. Do you know who called him? Reeves shook his head. No, he didn't say. He just said he had to take it outside. Did you see him talking to anyone? No, I just saw him walk out of the theater. Did you try to call him? Yes, but he didn't answer. Miller paused, considering his next move. He needed to verify Reeves' story. He needed to find out who had called Abernathy that night. And he needed to find out what had happened to Abernathy after he left the theater. Just then, Jones entered the interrogation room, his face grim. "Miller," he said, "we got the lab report back on the movie ticket stub." Miller's heart skipped a beat. "And?" "It matches the tickets sold at the Metro Cinema on the night of the murder. Specifically, it matches the tickets sold for the 9:30 showing of Steel Justice." That confirmed it. The movie ticket stub was genuine. It placed Abernathy and Reeves at the Metro Cinema on the night of the murder. "We also checked Abernathy's phone records," Jones continued. "He received a call at 10:15 p.m. that night. The call lasted for about 5 minutes. Who was the call from?" Miller asked, his voice barely a whisper. Jones hesitated. "It was from a burner phone. Untraceable. A burner phone. That meant someone had been planning something. Someone had wanted to remain anonymous. We're trying to track the location of the phone," Jones said. "But it's going to be difficult." Miller nodded. He knew that tracking a burner phone was like chasing a ghost. But he had to try. "Keep digging," Miller said. "I want to know everything about that phone. Who bought it, where it was used, who it called." Jones nodded and left the room. Miller turned back to Reeves. He knew that Reeves was hiding something. He could feel it. "You said you didn't know what happened to Abernathy after he left the theater," Miller said. "But I don't believe you, Mr. Reeves. I think you know more than you're letting on." The small torn ticket confirmed everything. It was time to push Reeves harder. The pieces of the puzzle were all on the table. "A burner phone, Mr. Reeves," Miller said, his voice rising slightly. "Someone called Abernathy from an untraceable phone just minutes before he disappeared. Does that sound like a man who was simply in danger, or a man who was about to meet his killer?" Reeves shifted in his seat, his face now slick with sweat. "I don't know anything about a burner phone," he stammered. "I swear." "You also said Abernathy seemed paranoid," Miller continued, pressing harder. "But wouldn't you agree it's a bit paranoid to ask to meet at a movie theater to begin with?" Reeves paused, trying to form an explanation, but no words came out. "The lab report confirms the ticket is real and links you to that movie," Miller said, slamming his hand on the table. "That proves you were lying about being out of town. Now tell me what really happened." Reeves flinched. He could feel the walls closing in. He knew that he couldn't keep up the charade any longer. Okay, he said, his voice trembling. "Maybe I didn't tell you everything." "No kidding, Mr. Reeves," Miller replied. Abernathy owed some people money," Reeves said, his eyes darting around the room. "He was in deep trouble." "What kind of trouble?" Miller asked. "Gambling debts," Reeves said. "He owed a lot of money to some very dangerous people." "And who were these people?" Reeves hesitated. "I don't know their names. I just know they were bad news." "Did Abernathy tell you he was going to meet them at the cinema?" Miller asked. "No, he just said he had to meet someone," Reeves said. "He didn't say who." "But you suspected it was these people?" Reeves nodded. "I was worried about him. I tried to talk him out of it, but he wouldn't listen." "So you went with him to protect him?" Miller asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes, that's right," Reeves said, seizing on the opportunity. "I was just trying to help him." "But you didn't tell me that before," Miller pointed out. Reeves shifted in his seat, looking uncomfortable. "I was scared," he said. "I didn't want to get involved." "So you lied to protect yourself?" Miller asked. "Yes," Reeves admitted. "I was just trying to stay out of trouble." Miller paused, considering Reeves' new story. It was still full of holes, but it was closer to the truth than anything he had said before. As Reeves spoke, the nervousness changed to arrogance, and Miller realized this version was just as untrue. He was running out of time. The clock was ticking, and he needed to get to the truth before it was too late. He knew he had to break him soon. Miller leaned back in his chair, studying Reeves. He knew that Reeves was still holding back. He could see it in his eyes, in the way he fidgeted, in the way he avoided direct eye contact. It was time to change tactics. Flashback sequence begins. The scene opens in Abernathy's opulent study, a few days before the murder. Abernathy paces nervously, while Reeves sits calmly, sipping a drink. "I'm telling you, Arthur, I'm in trouble," Abernathy says, his voice frantic. "I owe them a lot of money, and they want it now." "How much, John?" Reeves asks, his voice even. "500,000, Abernathy says, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't have that kind of money." "What about the Peterson deal?" Reeves asks. "That's supposed to close next week." "That would cover it." Abernathy shakes his head. "It's not going to happen," he says. "Peterson backed out. He found out about the way we've been doing things." Reeves sets down his drink, his eyes narrowing. "What do you mean?" he asks. "He knows about the offshore accounts," Abernathy says. "He knows about the kickbacks. He knows about everything." Reeves stands up, his face hardening. "You told him?" he asks, his voice low and dangerous. "No, of course not," Abernathy says. "He found out on his own. Someone must have leaked it." Reeves begins to pace, his mind racing. If Peterson backed out of the deal, they were both in serious trouble. Not just with the gambling debts, but with the law. "We need to do something," Reeves says. "We need to get that money somehow." "I don't know what to do," Abernathy says, his voice filled with despair. "I'm desperate." Reeves stops pacing and looks at Abernathy, a cold, calculating look in his eyes. "I have an idea," he says. Flashback sequence ends. Back in the interrogation room, Miller watches Reeves, his face unreadable. He had seen the flashback in his mind, piecing together the events leading up to the murder. Abernathy's gambling debts, the failed business deal, the threat of exposure, it all added up to a motive. But was Reeves involved? Had he been planning to kill Abernathy all along? Or had something else happened at the cinema that night? Miller felt close to breaking the case. Who was Abernathy supposed to meet that night, Mr. Reeves? Miller pressed, his voice relentless. Who called him on that burner phone? Reeves hesitated, his face contorted with a mixture of fear and desperation. He knew that he was cornered, that his lies were unraveling. The pressure was too much. He cracked. Okay, fine," he shouted, his voice breaking. "I was supposed to meet someone too." Miller leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. "Who?" "I can't tell you." Reeves cried. "They'll kill me." "They'll kill you if you don't tell me the truth, Mr. Reeves," Miller said, his voice cold and hard. "Abernathy is dead. You're next, unless you start cooperating." Reeves sobbed, his body shaking uncontrollably. It was a contact," he stammered. "Someone I've been working with on the Peterson deal." "What contact?" Miller demanded. "What's his name?" "I don't know his name." Reeves wailed. "I've only ever met him a few times. He always wears a hat and sunglasses. I don't know anything about him." "What did you meet him for?" "He was supposed to give me my cut of the Peterson deal," Reeves said. "Abernathy promised me a percentage, but he never paid me. The contact was supposed to give me the money." "So you were going to betray Abernathy?" Miller asked. "He was going to betray me." Reeves shouted. "He was going to cut me out of the deal completely. I deserved that money." Did you meet with this contact that night? Miller asked. No. Reeves insisted. I waited for him outside the theater, but he never showed up. I called him, but he didn't answer. That's when I started to worry about Abernathy. Miller paused, considering Reeves' latest story. It was convoluted, and it was still full of holes, but it had the ring of truth. He believed that Reeves had been planning to betray Abernathy, and that he had been waiting to meet his contact outside the theater. But he still didn't believe that Reeves was the killer. The pieces fit, except that there was still no physical evidence. He decided to change his tactics. He started describing how the murder had occurred, talking about the study, the books, and the locked door. At that, Reeves started crying, and Miller knew he was close. Miller decided to shift the focus of the investigation. He still believed Reeves was involved somehow, but he was starting to suspect that he wasn't the actual killer. If Reeves was telling the truth about meeting someone, that someone could be the key to unlocking the entire case. Tell me everything you know about this contact, Miller said. Everything. No matter how small or insignificant it may seem. Reeves racked his brain, trying to remember every detail. He always wore a dark suit, even in the summer. He was tall, but I don't know how tall exactly. He always wore a hat and sunglasses, so I never saw his face. He spoke with a slight accent, maybe European, I'm not sure. Did he ever mention his name? Miller asked. No, never. He always referred to himself as the facilitator. Did you ever exchange phone numbers? No, he always called me from a different number. It was always a burner phone. Did you ever meet him anywhere other than to Peterson deal meetings? Reeves shook his head. No. Those were the only times. Miller sighed. It wasn't much to go on. A tall man in a dark suit, hat, and sunglasses, with a possible European accent. It could be anyone. But it was a start. He tasked Jones with running down every lead, no matter how improbable. He wanted Jones to check surveillance footage from the areas where Reeves had met with the contact. He wanted him to track down any known associates of Abernathy who might fit the description. He even had Jones check travel records for recent visitors from Europe. While Jones worked on tracking down the contact, Miller decided to revisit the Peterson angle. He wanted to know why Peterson had backed out of the deal, and what he knew about Abernathy's illegal activities. He arranged a meeting with Peterson at his office. Peterson was a nervous, wiry man, clearly shaken by the recent events. I'm sorry to bother you, Mr. Peterson, Miller said, but I need to ask you some questions about John Abernathy and the proposed deal. Peterson hesitated. I don't know anything, detective, he said. I just decided that the deal wasn't right for my company. That's not what I heard, Mr. Peterson, Miller said, his voice hardening. I heard that you backed out because you found out about Abernathy's illegal activities. I heard that you were afraid of getting involved. Peterson started to sweat, and Miller could tell he was near the truth. The new suspect's identity was a mystery, but Peterson had to know something. Peterson finally cracked. All right, he said, his voice trembling. I'll tell you what I know. He explained that he had received an anonymous tip about Abernathy's illegal activities. The tipster had provided him with detailed information about the offshore accounts, the kickbacks, and the other shady deals that Abernathy had been involved in. I was shocked, Peterson said. I had no idea that Abernathy was involved in anything like that. I immediately pulled out of the deal. I didn't want to risk my company's reputation. Did the tipster give you any indication of who they were or why they were telling you this? Miller asked. No, Peterson said. They just said that they were doing the right thing. Did they mention anything about a facilitator? Peterson frowned. No, I don't think so. The only name that came up was Abernathy's. And yours, Mr. Reeves. Miller thanked Peterson for his cooperation and left his office. He had a feeling that the anonymous tipster and Reeves' contact were the same person. Someone who knew about Abernathy's illegal activities, and who had a motive for wanting him dead. Back at the precinct, Jones had made a breakthrough. He had managed to pull security footage from a nearby building that showed Reeves meeting with his contact on several occasions. The footage was grainy, but it was enough to get a decent description of the man. "He's tall, like you said," Jones said, showing Miller the footage. "He always wears a dark suit, hat, and sunglasses. And, get this, he always carries a cane." A cane. That was a detail that Reeves had left out. Jones ran the description through the database, and came up with a possible match: Victor Sinclair, a known associate of a powerful crime family with ties to Europe. Sinclair had a reputation for being a ruthless enforcer, and he was known to use a cane due to an old injury. Miller pulled up Sinclair's file. As he read through it, he discovered something that made his blood run cold. Sinclair had a long-standing gambling debt with John Abernathy. Abernathy had been Sinclair's bookie and the sums had grown large. This changed everything. Was Sinclair, the facilitator, the man who called Abernathy? Was he the man who locked the door? The torn ticket seemed less important now. The murder of Abernathy was all about money. Miller sat in his office, reviewing the evidence. The movie ticket stub, that seemingly insignificant piece of paper, had been the key to unlocking the truth. It had led him to the cinema, to Reeves' lies, and ultimately, to Victor Sinclair. He pieced together the events of that night, drawing on everything he had learned from Reeves, Peterson, and the security footage. Abernathy, desperate for money and fearing for his life, had agreed to meet with Sinclair at the Metro Cinema. He had called Reeves, his trusted confidant, asking him to come along, but failing to say why. Abernathy was likely afraid of the person he was meeting, but trusted no one else to be his backup. Reeves, eager to collect his cut from the Peterson deal, had agreed to meet with his contact outside the theater. He didn't know that Abernathy was in danger, or that Sinclair was planning to kill him. Abernathy had received the call from Sinclair inside the theater, and went outside to meet him. Sinclair, likely demanding immediate payment on the gambling debt, had lured Abernathy back to his study. The drive probably gave Abernathy some hope of escape, but he had entered the locked room. He likely believed he could talk his way out of it. Sinclair, enraged by Abernathy's refusal to pay, had killed him in a fit of rage. He had then locked the door from the inside, using a spare key that he had somehow obtained, staging the scene to look like a suicide or an accident. He likely wiped down surfaces, but did not find the movie ticket. Reeves, unaware of what had happened, had waited outside the theater for his contact, never realizing that he was standing just feet away from a murder scene. He went back to his hotel, just as he had told Miller. The problem was, Miller still couldn't figure out Reeves' role. Was he just an unwitting pawn in Sinclair's plan? Or was he more deeply involved? Had he known that Abernathy was going to be killed? Had he been promised a share of the money? Did he supply the spare key? Miller decided to bring Reeves back in for another round of questioning. He had a feeling that Reeves knew more than he was letting on. He had a feeling that the truth was just within his grasp. He considered Sinclair's need for the money and Abernathy's history with the crime family. Then, it all clicked. It was about more than money. It was about power. The gambling debts were only a piece of the puzzle. Abernathy had been moving in on Sinclair's territory. Sinclair had to eliminate the competition. And he'd used the movie, the meeting, and Reeves as the way to do it. Miller burst into the interrogation room, his eyes blazing. Sinclair was sitting calmly, his cane resting beside him. Jones stood guard by the door. "Victor Sinclair," Miller said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You're under arrest for the murder of John Abernathy." Sinclair smirked. "You have no proof," he said, his voice smooth and confident. "I was out of town on business." "We have witnesses who saw you with Abernathy at the Metro Cinema on the night of the murder," Miller said. We have phone records that place you at the scene. And we have a motive. You owed Abernathy a lot of money, and he was moving in on your territory. Sinclair remained calm, unfazed by Miller's accusations. Abernathy was a friend, he said. I would never hurt him. You're a liar, Sinclair, Miller said. You lured Abernathy to the cinema, you killed him in his study, and you staged the scene to look like a suicide. You're grasping at straws, detective, Sinclair said. You have nothing. We have Reeves, Miller said. He's ready to testify against you. Sinclair's eyes narrowed slightly. He knew that Reeves was the weak link. Reeves is a liar, Sinclair said. He's trying to frame me. Reeves is scared, Sinclair, Miller said. He's scared of you. But he's also tired of lying. He's ready to tell the truth. Miller pulled out the security footage from the building near the meeting location. He pressed play. The grainy footage showed Sinclair meeting with Reeves on several occasions. Sinclair, in his dark suit, hat, and sunglasses, carrying his cane. Recognize this man, Mr. Sinclair? Miller asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Sinclair remained silent, his face a mask of composure. We also have a witness who saw you leaving Abernathy's study on the night of the murder, Miller said. She saw you lock the door and walk away. Sinclair's composure finally cracked. His eyes widened slightly, and a bead of sweat trickled down his forehead. It's over, Sinclair, Miller said, his voice triumphant. We have you. It's time to confess. Sinclair finally broke down. He confessed to everything. He admitted that he had lured Abernathy to the cinema, that he had killed him in his study, and that he had staged the scene to look like a suicide. He admitted that he had used Reeves as a pawn in his plan. I had to do it, Sinclair said, his voice filled with rage. Abernathy was ruining me. He was taking everything I had. Miller listened to Sinclair's confession, his heart filled with a mixture of satisfaction and disgust. He had finally solved the case, but the truth was ugly and disturbing. You're a monster, Sinclair, Miller said. You'll pay for what you've done. As Sinclair was led away, Miller turned to Jones. Book him, he said. And make sure he never sees the light of day again. It had been a long investigation, and it had been hard on Miller. The movie ticket had been a key piece of evidence, but it was the power of greed that drove Sinclair to murder. The case was closed. Victor Sinclair was behind bars, facing a long prison sentence. But what about Arthur Reeves? Was he just an unwitting pawn, or was he an accomplice? After Sinclair's confession, Reeves was brought back in for questioning. This time, he was more forthcoming. He admitted that he had suspected that Abernathy was involved in something dangerous, but he claimed that he had no idea that Sinclair was planning to kill him. I just wanted my money, Reeves said, his voice filled with remorse. I didn't want anyone to get hurt. Miller considered Reeves' story. He knew that Reeves was greedy and ambitious, but he didn't believe that he was capable of murder. He had likely witnessed the meeting, but it was difficult to prove he was an accomplice. He hadn't called for help. He hadn't alerted authorities. He just walked away. Ultimately, Miller decided to cut Reeves a deal. In exchange for his testimony against Sinclair, Reeves would be charged with obstruction of justice and accessory after the fact. He would serve a reduced sentence, but he would have to live with the knowledge that he had played a role in Abernathy's death. As Miller sat in his office, reviewing the case file one last time, he reflected on the events that had led to Abernathy's murder. A web of lies, greed, and betrayal. And at the center of it all, a small, torn movie ticket stub. A seemingly insignificant piece of paper that had unlocked the truth. He thought about the importance of small details, of trusting his instincts, of never giving up on a case, no matter how difficult it seemed. He thought about Abernathy, a man who had risen to the top through hard work and ambition, but who had ultimately fallen victim to his own greed and ambition. And he thought about Reeves, a man who had been so consumed by his desire for money that he had lost his way, becoming entangled in a web of deceit and violence. The city held its breath, waiting for the next crime, the next mystery. And Detective Miller, the seasoned, cynical detective with a flicker of justice still burning within him, would be there, ready to unravel the tangled webs of lies and deceit, one small detail at a time. The torn movie ticket had started everything. A small detail that changed everything.